All right, let's dive into one of history's most fascinating and, let's be honest, terrifying figures. We're talking about a man whose name is practically a synonym for both national hero and unspeakable cruelty. This is the real story of Vlad III Dracula, the man the world would come to know as Vlad the Impaler.
This quote, it really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? It frames his entire legacy. We're about to get into a story of raw brutality, of vengeance, and of absolute power. So let's pull back the curtain on the myth and find the man underneath.
So, our story kicks off way back in 1431 in the rugged mountains of Transylvania. Now, you have to understand, Vlad wasn't born into some peaceful, stable kingdom. No, this was a violent, chaotic frontier, basically a buffer zone between empires. War and betrayal, that was just the air he breathed from day one.
You know, even his name was a battleground. His father was a member of the Order of the Dragon, this Christian military order fighting the Ottomans. That made Vlad Dracula, which means son of the dragon. But his enemies? They loved to twist that. They heard Dracul and spread the word that it meant devil. So right from the start, he's seen as both this holy warrior and a demonic tyrant. That duality would follow him his entire life.
And to really get Vlad, you've got to get his homeland, Wallachia. This place was a snake pit of conspiracy. The nobles, they called them boyars, they switched sides whenever it suited them. In a world like that, being a nice, merciful prince was a death sentence. The only thing that kept you alive, the only thing that kept you on the throne, was being the strongest, most ruthless person in the room.
But if you think Wallachian politics were a tough school, believe me, that was just the beginning. The experience that would truly forge Vlad into the man he became was going to happen far from home, right in the belly of the beast, the heart of the Ottoman Empire.
Think about this. At just 11 years old, he and his little brother are handed over as political hostages to the Ottoman Sultan. This wasn't just being locked in a room, it was an education. He spent his formative years watching how real, absolute power worked. He saw that the Sultan didn't rule through chaos, but through cold, calculated, public terror. And that's where he learned the most important lesson of his life. Loyalty is fleeting, but fear is a tool you can rely on.
And all that cruelty he witnessed, it was about to find a very, very personal purpose. Because while he was a captive, news came from back home. News that would light a fire in him, transforming him from a young prince into an engine of pure vengeance.
So, while Vlad's a hostage, the Wallachian nobles, his own people, team up with Hungary and make their move. They capture his father and chop off his head. But what they did to his older brother, Mircea, was something else entirely. They blinded him with red-hot pokers, and then they buried him alive. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. Whatever grief and fear a young boy would feel, it didn't just turn into anger. It crystallized. It hardened into a cold, sharp, singular mission. He made an oath to himself. No one will ever betray me again and live. In fact, they'll pay a price so terrible they'll wish for death.
So when he finally clawed his way to the throne, Vlad didn't just plan on ruling Wallachia. He planned on breaking it and then remaking it in his own terrifying image, using all those lessons he learned in captivity.
But look, his path back wasn't a straight line. His first shot at the throne lasted a measly 60 days before he was forced out. That was followed by 8 long years in exile. You can just imagine how those years as a powerless refugee must have sharpened his resolve, stewing on his revenge. So when he came back in 1456, he was a different man. He was laser-focused.
And his revenge started with an absolute masterstroke of terror. He invited hundreds of the boyars, including the families who killed his father and brother, to a huge Easter feast. He pretended it was all about forgiveness, letting bygones be bygones. But once they were all inside, the doors were locked. The older ones, the masterminds of the betrayal, impaled right then and there. The younger, healthier ones, he marched them 50 miles to the mountains and forced them to build a fortress until they literally worked themselves to death. In a single night, he had wiped out an entire generation of his enemies.
Which brings us to his signature method. For Vlad, impalement wasn't just random, messy violence. Oh no, it was a science. It was psychological warfare. The stake was driven through the body with anatomical precision, deliberately missing vital organs to make sure the victim stayed alive, in agony for days. It was a public spectacle, a walking, screaming billboard, designed to make the very thought of crossing Vlad the most terrifying thing you could possibly imagine.
Okay, so with his kingdom now held in an iron grip of fear,
Vlad turns his attention to the biggest threat on the map, the mighty Ottoman Empire, led by none other than Sultan Mehmed II, the guy who had just conquered Constantinople. Just look at these numbers for a second. It's insane. Mehmed comes rolling in with an army of around 80,000 of the best soldiers in the world. Vlad, he could scrape together maybe 20,000. A head-on battle would be total suicide. So Vlad decided to fight a different kind of war. He decided to fight with terror.
I want you to hold this number in your head, 20,000. It wasn't the size of Vlad's army that would decide this war. It was going to be the number of corpses he could put on display.
So as the Sultan's massive army marched towards Vlad's capital, they weren't met by soldiers. They were met by a forest of 20,000 impaled Ottoman prisoners, rotting on stakes for miles. It was a vision straight out of hell, a message of such absolute, horrifying brutality that it completely shattered the morale of the most feared army on the planet. Even Mehmed the Conqueror, a man who'd seen it all, was reportedly sickened, and he turned his army around.
So Vlad did the impossible. He turned back the Ottoman tide. You'd think this would be his moment of triumph, right? But in a cruel twist, this is where the brutal politics of his world came crashing back in. And this time, they would cement his legend as a monster. The irony here is just staggering. His own Christian ally, the King of Hungary, was supposed to be sending reinforcements. But instead, he saw this powerful, victorious Vlad as a threat. A Wallachia that strong was too independent for his liking. So he had Vlad arrested on trumped-up charges of treason. The man who stopped the Sultan was betrayed by his allies and thrown in a dungeon for 12 years.
He eventually got out and even had one last, short reign as prince. But he died the way he lived, fighting the Ottomans in battle. And his enemies made sure to have the last word. They cut off his head, preserved it in honey, and shipped it to Constantinople. There they put it on a stake for everyone to see. It was their final, gruesome message: the Impaler is finished.
But they couldn't kill his story. In fact, by making such a spectacle of his death, they cemented his legend forever. The fear he had used as a weapon to protect his country escaped its borders. The stories and pamphlets turned the man into a myth, an immortal monster.
And that's what we're left with, isn't it? That's the big question. Was this man a sadistic monster? Was he a national hero who did what was necessary to save his people, or was he simply a product of his unbelievably brutal time, the only kind of leader who could possibly have survived in a world full of wolves? The answer? Well, that's still being debated.